This is Christianity 101, the podcast connecting busy people with Jesus. I'm your host, Rick Grundy. This is episode 1. Welcome back. Today's a great episode because we are beginning a brand new series as we go through Hebrews together. And so today we're looking at Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 to 14. And I'll tell you something that I'm doing slightly different here. As we went through Romans together, I took some time to teach through Romans. I did a very kind of a Bible study commentary kind of thing. I wanted to give you some kind of commentary to help you dig into and understand the letter of Romans a little bit better. I'm not doing that with Hebrews. With Hebrews, I'm going to be using my sermon series, and the content is going to be found from my sermon. So this isn't going to feel like a Bible study. It's actually going to feel, I hope anyways, like a conversational, slowed down sermon, I hope. Looking forward to the comments and all your feedback about this new change. So here we go, beginning at Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 to 4. This past week was awesome. I converted my church, Hillside Community Church, into a laser tag facility. And so both floors, the top and the bottom, all through the sanctuary, all through the children's wing and in the basement, it was laser tag. It was awesome. We had lots of obstacles around that you could hide through, that you could run around. And my friend who owns it's like a backyard laser tag company that he has. He came in and converted. It was just awesome. We had 30 youth there, and we completely. We didn't trash the place, but we filled the place with laser beams. Something funny happened, though. We were using smoke machines, and I had no idea that Alarm Force Canada was also I knew it was our alarm system, but it's also our fire alarm detector. And so Alarm Force started our box started going woo woo, like this crazy sound in the middle of laser tag. The kids loved it because they thought it was just part of the fun. It's like, wow, there's alarms going off now. Awesome. And then Alarm Force starts talking to me. Is everything okay there? The smoke alarm's going off. So we had to air out the church and get rid of the fog from the smoke machines, and it looked like the church was on fire as we opened up the door. We filled the place with smoke. Anyways, it was a lot of fun. You know, when I was a youth intern, so I'm the new youth leader at my church because we haven't found a new youth director yet. So I've taken that over, and I'm loving it. The kids are awesome. When I was an intern, and I was serving as a helper to the youth pastor at a church I was at, I remember this one event that we were doing, and the kids were completely out of control. And I wasn't the youth pastor. I was the guy who was helping out. And as the guy who was helping out, the kids weren't really listening to me. And it was getting more and more chaotic, more and more out of control. And some of the kids, they were beginning to walk to the door and walk to the leave. And then what happened? The youth pastor entered the room. And I'm not kidding you, it was like night and day. Suddenly there was peace, and there was calm, and there was respect, and the kids were all listening to the guy. And it just made something a lot better. Yeah, you know what? Something similar happens when you and I engage with Jesus. Because Jesus is far superior than any other influence in our life, and Jesus has that power and authority and calming effect from like that guy that walks into the room that has a little bit more authority, a little bit more influence over that. That's Jesus. Jesus is far superior to anything and anyone else, that nothing at all can push back against him or resist his will. So if you have chaos in your life, if you're going through a really hard time because of cancer, because of relationship problems, because of your marriage, Jesus walks into a life like yours. And Jesus, because he's far superior to anything else that you're faced with, he brings that calming effect and that soothing effect, and he makes life good again. This month's theme, beginning in this podcast right here, is what's so great about Jesus. I've looked at the opening few passages of Hebrews, and in my mind, this theme, what's so great about Jesus, is really reflected on all of the opening passages through the letter of Hebrews. Here are some fun facts about the letter of Hebrews. I don't want to get too teachy because I don't want to lose you. I don't want your eyes to glaze over here, but there's some cool facts about Hebrews that I think you might like to know. For instance, unlike the letter of Romans that we just studied, Hebrews isn't really a letter. Hebrews is actually a sermon. At least that's how it reads. I can get up in the pulpit and read Hebrews from the Message or another maybe New Living Translation, something a little bit more of a paraphrase, and nobody will know that it's from the Bible if they've never read it before. They would think that I'm speaking a sermon, because that's what we think, anyways, what the commentators say. We think that this is a sermon, and it looks like that last chapter of Hebrews was added on the end of it in order to convert the sermon into a letter that was sent. So it looks like this thing that we have, this letter, this sermon, was really meant to be a sermon for a smaller group of people, like a local assembly. We have no idea who it was written by. So all of you who are frustrated that the Bible was completely written by men, we're all the women writers. Well, okay. So here's a little bit for you. Okay, I'll give you something here. We have no idea who wrote the letter of Hebrews. God only knows who wrote the letter of Hebrews. It's possible that a woman could have written the letter of Hebrews. Now, in my mind, I'm kind of thinking it may have been Apollos, but again, we have no idea. So for those of you who are looking, what about the women writers? Well, it's possible that Hebrews may have been written by a woman. We just don't know who wrote this thing. As you read through the letter of Hebrews, you notice a lot of quotes, you notice a lot of references to the Old Testament. And some have said that that's because this is a letter written to a church who was about to apostatize. They felt that there were Jewish believers in the church. Persecution was on the rise. They wanted to go back to Judaism to ride out the wave of persecution and come back into Christianity. And that could be the case, very valid. But I think what's more likely, and when I say I think, it's because I think I see the commentaries leading in this direction, and in my mind this makes sense to me too. The Old Testament was the Bible back in the early church. So this pastor who's writing this sermon, he's referencing the Bible that his church knew. And so, we are going to see a lot of comments in the letter of Hebrews about, hold on with a firm grip, don't drift. There's lots of warnings through Hebrews about walking out on your faith, just leaving Christianity and apostatizing, going someplace else. But I think for the large part, we see a lot of Old Testament quotes and references because it was the Bible that they had at the day. Now, here's the really, really big deal behind Hebrews, okay? The really big deal behind Hebrews. And I'm going to summarize this really big deal with just one word, okay? As you're reading the warnings, as you're reading the direction the book is taking, here's the one word, in my mind, the reason, I think, the inspiration of the pastor, I think, behind the writing of this sermon letter. And here's the one word: apathy. That's the word. People were not engaging in their Bibles. As a matter of fact, some of the warnings that you see, particularly the early warnings that you see in Hebrews about the apathy that's filling the church at the time, at least his local church, had to do with people not engaging with their Bibles. They didn't know their Bibles well enough. People weren't engaging their Bible. People weren't interested in putting some work into their friendship with Jesus. They were drifting, and we see a warning about drifting in Hebrews. People were in danger of drifting right out of their friendship with Jesus, or making a decision that would take them outside of their friendship with Jesus because they weren't valuing Jesus' work on the cross and his resurrection enough. People were in danger of turning their back on Jesus entirely. So in light of that, in light of the big deal reason why this sermon of Hebrews was written, here's the big deal point that the author is making through the entire sermon. And I could give it to you in a word, but it really wouldn't make sense. I'll give it to you in 3 words. But if in one word, here's the one word that summarizes the answer to apathy. And that summary word is superior. But you need 3 words because you need context of that. Here it is. Jesus is superior. He's better than what we want to have, what we hope to gain, the things we're listening to, the people we're following, the other spiritual things we dabble in, or what we try to blend in Christianity. Jesus is greater than it all. So we see a lot of comparisons throughout the letter of Hebrews. Particularly, we're going to see a comparison with the angels, comparison with Moses. We see some comparisons that the author's really trying to show us, this pastor, this writer of this sermon letter is trying to show us how much far superior Jesus is, so that these apathetic Christians who may be in danger of walking into Christianity and going to some other religion, the author's saying, no, wait a minute. Jesus is far superior than anything you may want in this life, anything you may be trying to protect yourself from, any other religion that you're trying to go to. Jesus is far superior. And certainly a response of apathy is out of the question within Christianity. He's superior enough. He's great enough for you. And failing to recognize that could prove disastrous for you too. So as you read the text, I'm not going to take time to read the text on the podcast here. Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 to 11. There's a link in the show notes. You click on that link. It'll take you over to BibleGateway.org. You read those 4 verses. And as you read it, I want you to notice a couple of reasons why Jesus is greater. Now, here's the point that I want to make throughout this particular podcast, okay? So apathy, I think, is the reason the letter was written, the sermon was written. Jesus superior is the overall message, the overall answer, application for the whole letter. Here is this particular reason for this particular podcast. Here's my point. I want to talk about why Jesus' way is the best way and how to embrace it. Why Jesus' way is the best way and how to embrace it. And really, so in my mind, as I read the text, I see 2 reasons why Jesus' way is great. And then I also see how it is, instructions about how it is that we embrace it. So I'll give you just a little bit of a heads up here. Here's kind of message at a glance, if I could say that. Just a little heads up of where I'm going for through the rest of the podcast. We're going to talk about how Jesus speaks best. We're going to talk about some of the sources that we refer to find spiritual wisdom, and we're going to look at why Jesus' words are better than those. Firstly, Jesus speaks best. Secondly, Jesus acts best. We're going to look at all of the things that we can do, that other world religions can do, that everybody else can do, and what Jesus has done, and we're going to compare who does what best. And then thirdly, I'm going to close by talking about how it is that we embrace the way that Jesus is encouraging us to go. All right, so let's jump into the podcast and let's into the content rather, and let's really talk about that first point here. Jesus speaks best. And for this first point, okay, Jesus' way is the best way because Jesus speaks best. I'm taking this from the first 2 verses. And the first 2 verses say, in the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he's spoken to us by his Son. So very important. God spoke to our ancestors through prophets. So there's a voice coming through a prophet, not from God. And in other various ways. So there's other things. Angels have come to deliver God's messages. We see a hand writing on the wall in one of the books of the prophets. And Daniel, I can't remember. I think it's Daniel. And so God has spoken through different ways, but never directly. It says, but in these last days, he's spoken to us by his Son. Jesus speaks best. Sometimes, well, more than sometimes actually, I'm downstairs and I need my son's help, or I need to ask him a question. And so I'll call his name. I'll say, Luke, and I don't want him just to yell back at me. I want him to come here. So maybe that's my fault. Maybe I should say, Luke, would you please come here? And I'm just saying Luke, so maybe I could do something better. But here we go. I say Luke, and that's answered with a muffled yell from within his room, and the door is closed from upstairs. So I'll say Luke, and you go, yeah, what was that? I say, Luke, and you go, and he'll just continue louder. It's like, Luke, come here. There is a better way to communicate, a far better way to communicate rather than on different floors through closed doors. It's face to face. When I call my son, I want him to come to me, and then I need his help or something. And I think that this is what this passage is helping us to understand here. There is a far better way to communicate, and that face-to-face communication is not what we have seen in the past, but the face-to-face communication is something that we actually see right now. The opening sentences of this sermon, in these opening sentences, this pastor, this author, he starts by explaining, or she, could be a she, starts by explaining how much superior God's communication has become with us, with you and I, has become. That's vitally important because his audience is used to listening to God through other sources. I think we have to understand that. This pastor's audience is used to, particularly if they're predominantly Jews, if this is a Jewish, and I think it is a Jewish congregation, mostly Jewish congregation, then they are used to hearing God's voice through other sources. They're used to God speaking through prophets. They're used to God speaking through angels, if only by looking at the source of their Old Testament. They're used to that kind of communication. And people today, it's not too different today, is it? People try to hear God, and they may not call him God. They may call him the universe. They may call him something out there, something different, knocking on whatever. People try to listen to God through a lot of sources, just like these first readers did. But there's one source that is far superior. Let's talk about how things used to be. God used to talk through prophets. God used to speak through famines and through droughts and through aggression and through aggression through other nations, I should say. He is now using a form of communication that is far superior to any other communication God has ever used. How many of you are happy to know that when you want to hear from God, you don't have to knock on your neighbor's door? Isn't that awesome? Now, some of you don't even get along with some of your neighbors. That would be really, really horrible if we had to go and knock on our neighbor's door that we didn't get along with to hear the voice of God. That'd be horrible. Aren't you glad that we don't have to do that? How many are happy that you don't have to fly to Australia to get a word from God? Actually, you know what? I have some Australia listeners. Thank you for listening. Shout out to Australia. God bless you. So what if you had to fly to Canada to hear the word, some kind of word from God? Well, you don't have to do that. And aren't you glad that you don't have to do that? This is what the pastor is trying to tell us. First of all, God had communicated indirectly in the past. It says in the past. We're talking about the Old Testament. Throughout the Old Testament, God spoke through others. And that was usually prophets, priests, some kings, angels. Those are really the four major sources, I guess. Prophets and priests and kings, they were great. But there were two voices that were held far superior, and that was angels and Moses. And we're going to talk about angels and Moses in the next couple of passages here. Actually, beginning in verse 4, it talks about angels. The reason is because that was, in their mind, in the people's mind of those days, a far superior mode of communication from God. Angels were heavenly beings, and who share the same space as God. Now, I don't want to steal my thunder here because that's the next podcast content. Moses, even greater than angels, by the way, in some people's minds, of the original readers, that is, Moses was a person that God spoke directly to. Like, we're talking face-to-face communication with a human being, and we're going to read about Moses just a little bit later as well. So the author is reminding us that of the past so that we can see how good we have it in the present. We don't know how good we have it in the present until we say, no, wait a minute, let's reflect on how things used to be. At one time, you You didn't know the voice of God at all. Neither did I. At one time, the only thing you knew about God, it came from someone else. You didn't go straight from the source. Someone else told you. Even if that someone else was a neighbor coming over inviting you to church, that's still hearing about God from someone else. But God personally stepped into your reality and my reality. Jesus spoke to us directly. And of course, Jesus' words are now recorded in the New Testament. So going to the New Testament is going to the source. Jesus' Holy Spirit also is alive inside of us, and that Holy Spirit inside of us is confirming the truth for us. There are spiritual sources that we used to use to learn about spiritual things. They could have been fortune tellers. They could have been Oprah and Chopra, a guru, an old religious text, magazines, new agey things. Like, I don't know what your background is. I only know what my background is and the people around me that I know really well. But there's a lot of sources that we have gone to find religious direction, spiritual direction. There's absolutely no reason at all to hang on to any of that, because God has spoken to us in a new way. God now communicates personally. The text says, in these last days, now that Jesus come, this is a new day, and God is speaking in a new way. These are these last days. There was a time when you and I couldn't hear from God. We didn't know God. We took the word of other people who thought they could tell us something about God or anything spiritual. That day, my friends, has passed. In this day, God speaks for himself directly. I'm going to play for you just a little clip here, a little audio clip here. And I'll tell you, let me set up this audio clip first. For me, when I was just coming into my days of starting the church and understanding who God was, I heard from God through the movie Ghostbusters. And I kid you not, okay, this was my source for finding God or godly material. And it's I'm not being silly about this. Well, I'm trying not to be. I do kind of chuckle about this. But this is true of a lot of people. A lot of people get their information from God, from media and other kind of movies, TV. I got my first taste of God from the Ghostbusters. So here's the clip. This is the clip that sparked my interest and said, okay, this is something real. God has spoken to me here, and I need to do something about that. Here is the audio clip that made me say, okay, time to start looking into God.
The city is headed for a disaster of biblical proportion.
What do you mean, biblical?
What he means is Old Testament, Mr. Mayor. Real wrath of God type stuff.
Exactly.
Fire and brimstone coming down from the skies. Rivers and seas boiling.
40 years of darkness, earthquakes, volcanoes.
The dead rising from the grave. Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together. Mass hysteria.
Now, isn't that silly? It's not even... It's barely referring to the Bible, cats and dogs and what? But when I started listening to the dead rising in Old Testament days, and it just did something to me, and just that mention of the word the Bible, it did something inside of me, and that became my God source. That was what I referred to as the closest thing that God had ever spoken to me. Now, I don't know what your initial God sources were, and I don't know what your spiritual sources are now, but I can tell you, we don't have to do that kind of stuff because God speaks directly now. Whatever it was that you and I used to use as a source for spiritual direction, it is time to put it aside and move on. Because there's a real good reason for doing that too. Because God is speaking to us directly now. There's no reason to look for spiritual guidance from any other source. We go directly to Jesus. Now, here's the point I think the author's trying to make, at least in this first part right here. Communication from Jesus is far superior. Communication from Jesus is far superior. Wouldn't you agree with me that communication from Jesus is far superior than communication from the movie of the Ghostbusters? Wouldn't you agree with me about that? The text is by his son. Now, I know it sounds silly, but God's son is a better source than Ghostbusters. God's Son is a better source than, well, let's throw a bunch of stuff out there because I don't know what your sources are. God's Son is a better source than, say, witchcraft, Ouija boards, cults, spiritual TV shows, other world religions, TV shows, radio shows, podcasts, YouTube videos, seances, crystal balls, Wicca, name it, anything at all. God is a better source. Jesus is a better source. Jesus is the best source because he's the direct source. Jesus is the best source because he's the direct source. You can know God because he's revealed himself to you. You can know his will because he's clearly revealed it to you in the Bible. Connect with the Bible. You don't have to travel to find God. You can find God in the book that he wrote. So what's so great about Jesus? Firstly, he speaks best. He speaks for himself. Well, here's another reason why Jesus' way is the best way. Jesus' way is the best way because Jesus doesn't only speak best. Jesus acts best. Verses 2 to 3 say, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom also he made the universe. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. I mentioned that I was the new youth leader at Hillside, and I don't say that begrudgingly. I don't say that like I've just taken on a lot of work that I don't want. I love it. And yeah, it's my Tuesdays are crazy. We do youth nights on Tuesday nights now, and that's like a 14 or 16 hour day for me. But I don't come away from that drained or like, oh man, I can't believe I'm doing this. I love it. The kids that are in my youth night right now, well, let me start by saying this. This is the best behaved youth group I have ever led. Now, I've led a couple of youth groups, and if you're listening to this and you used to be a part of my youth group, that's not a slam against you. I loved your youth group too. All the youth groups are great, but this one is the best behaved youth group, and I'll tell you why. Because these kids that are in youth group now, in grade 7 now, that have just come up and joined youth group, they were from my kids' night. A lot of them were from my kids' night program, and so they already know me as Pastor Rick, the leader of kids' night, so there's a relationship there. Also, my son is doing a really great job at inviting his friends out to kids' night and also out to youth. And so these kids that are coming to youth now, they don't only, well, some of them don't know me as Pastor Rick, some of them know me as Luke's dad. And so there's that special kind of behavior that they give me because I'm Luke's dad, and I'm the guy that picks them up and drives them home and buys them donuts, and they come over to my place and play with Luke, and I spoil them whenever they're over here, and just a little bit though. Anyways, they know me. It's great. I've never led a youth group that's so well behaved because I've got that dad effect going on now as well. We're learning that Jesus wears a lot of hats. Like I wear a lot of hats. I'm pastor, youth pastor, I'm dad. I wear a lot of hats. Jesus wears a lot of hats, and all of them are great. They're great for us. Let me just share with you a summary of what he's done through the words of the text right here. The text says he made the universe. He has created. Talking about Jesus, not the Father, not the Spirit. Talking about Jesus only here. No, okay? He has created. The text says made the universe. In the beginning, Jesus created the heavens and the earth. In John chapter 1 verse 3 it says, through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. It's funny, believers sometimes gravitate towards the Father when they think about creation, and we think the Father created everything. It's not what we learn in John, and it's not what we learn right here. It's actually the Son is the creator here. Obviously not working independent of the Father. I'm not going there, but Jesus is the creator. Jesus' way is the best way because Jesus does the greatest stuff. Who else has made something greater than the creation? This is the guy that we're following. This is the way that we're aligning ourselves with. No one else can create what Jesus creates. Not only has he created, he has redeemed. He's both creator and redeemer. The text says purification for sins. Not only is Jesus creator, he's redeemer. The one who created you died for you. The one who created me died for me. Jesus' way is the best way because it's the only way to reconnect us with the Creator. The Creator wants to be reconnected with his creation. And so he personally provided a way to make that reconnection happen. So thirdly, he has completed. I love this phrase, these two words here, sat down. I'm telling you, I love this phrase. Right now in my basement, I am painting it because I had this little project in mind where I wanted to renovate my basement. It was just nothing. It was just concrete and pink foam for insulation. And my kids would go down there and they didn't like it. They would scare them and they'd go back upstairs, which means that their toys are in my bedroom and in the living room and everywhere. And I want to give them a place to play and get their toys out of my bedroom and the living room. And anyways, so that's kind of the inspiration that I had. So I went down to my basement and said, I'm just going to start renovating. So I started renovating and I just finished painting it. But I'll tell you what happened. When I got to the mudding and the sanding part, I hated it. So I sat down and I said, forget this. I don't want to do that. But the room never got done. So eventually I had to get up and I had to start inspiring myself. Okay, I got to do this. The work is still done. I got to do this. So now I am working hard to try to get this basement done before the winter comes because I basically blew off the whole summer going camping, just playing and working. And now I'm working like any chance I get, I'm down in the basement and I'm just working. I am not sitting. I am tired. The text says that Jesus sat down. Now here's what that means. I don't sit down because my work's not done. Do you understand that? I'm up, I'm climbing ladders, I'm doing stuff. My work is not done. Jesus' work is done. Text says sat down. Jesus is pictured as seated because his work is done. Salvation is completely accomplished. There is nothing more that needs to be done by God to reconcile us. Now God's waiting for us to choose him. That's what's left. The work now is ours. Jesus' way is the best way because it takes all of the pressure off of you and me because we can't be good enough. We can't pay for our sins. After you've chosen Jesus, your work is the work of friendship and faithfulness. It's not the work of being punished. It's not the work of trying to pay for your own mistakes. It's not the work of working off your debt, because that can never be done. Jesus is sitting down at the right hand of God. So with the authority of the Father, Jesus' work is done, and he's reconnecting you with the Father because of your faith in Jesus. Now here's the biggest reason, maybe. This might be the biggest reason right here, why Jesus he acts way better than anything else. He is God. The text says radiance of God, exact representation of the two phrases used, radiance, exact. Jesus is God. He's not a messenger. He's not an angel. He's not a prophet, not a priest, not a king. He is exactly God. Now, in my mind, this is the greatest reason why Jesus' way is the best way. Because every other option available is a guess at best. This way is the real deal. Not because it comes from the source, but because it is the source. Did you hear that? It doesn't only come from the source. This is the source. So what's so great about Jesus? Well, Jesus is God who created everything and then sacrificed himself for us. He's done greater things than anyone or anything else has or could have ever done. And what he wants in return is our faith and our faithfulness. He wants our friendship. So since Jesus' way is the best way, okay, I'm going to end with this point right here. Here's how to embrace it. Here is how to embrace Jesus' way. First of all, faith and faithfulness, practically the same thing. Faith and faithfulness. An easier way to say faith and faithfulness is friendship. A real relationship is what God wants from us and with us. Hold on to Jesus with your initial faith, would you? Choose to believe in him. choose to befriend him. Hold on to Jesus with your continued faithfulness. So for the Christians who are listening, Jesus isn't a religion looking for your performance. He's God looking for a lifetime friendship. And if you give it to him, he'll reward you with a forever friendship. So faith and faithfulness. Here's another way of embracing Jesus' way. Reject everything else. Okay, this is vitally important. Reject everything else. So that first point is too simple for our long-standing Christians. If you're a believer, then faith and faithfulness, you probably have that down. But here's something that really comes right into the text and as an application. Reject everything else. Jesus' way is so far superior to any other way that every other way should be confidently rejected. There is no need to be running here and there to find God. There is no reason to search in mainstream media to learn something about God. Your Bible and your local church, I mean the people around you, are your best source to connect with God more deeply. Every other way absolutely needs to be rejected. Jesus isn't religion. He's your best friend. But this is an exclusive relationship. And when I talk about every other way, I don't mean don't go look at a commentary, don't go do Bible studies. I mean the other stuff that I see people doing. Jesus is your first and best friend, and he won't share the spot with anyone else. Every other spiritual pursuit that doesn't focus on learning about God through the Bible needs to be terminated. Every other spiritual source that you use that's not focusing on learning about God through the Bible, if you're not learning through the Bible, reject it. If the source of information comes from anything else other than the Bible, reject it. I'm not suggesting we stop talking to people or stick our heads in the sand so we're not aware of what's going on around us. I'm saying that we have rejected any other path to spiritual enlightenment outside of Jesus. We don't dabble and test the waters anywhere else. God came, he spoke, he acted, and he's calling you into an exclusive contract, an exclusive relationship. Here's one thing I want to leave with you, okay? I said a lot of words, and I want to leave you with something memorable. So here's one thing that's memorable that you can take away with you. And if you don't remember any of the other words in this podcast, if you just remember this, I think that you've done well. So here it is. Here, I'm going to summarize this whole podcast in three words. Here it is. Jesus is superior. That's it for this episode. Thanks for sticking with me and hanging in there through this very first opening podcast for Hebrews. I'll be back next week. Can't hardly wait until then. God bless you.